Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeffrey Driscoll, and I'm with Communications in the City of Edmonton. Today we have Mayor Don Iveson, as well as Interim City Manager Adam Laughlin, who will speak to the recent COVID restrictions put on by the province. We will have them speak for a little bit, and then we'll, of course, open it up for questions. Before we start, though, I'd like to take a moment and thank our interpreters, Kevin Culp and Amanda Omoth, for being here. Over to you, Mr. Mayor.
Hello to everyone, and thank you for joining us here today. I want to start off this update by recognizing that this has been a very trying time for Edmontonians. Many of you are exhausted by this pandemic. More people every day have friends and family members sick or even in the hospital on account of COVID-19, or worse, have lost someone dear. Our lives have all been upended and disrupted, and there is much uncertainty. It's hard. But we're here for each other, and this community shows its strength at times like this. Knowing the intense pressure that residents are under, take heart that your city remains focused on ensuring we're supporting public health measures enacted by Alberta Health under the public health emergency in order that they can be effective, advocating for clarity on the ability of our municipal peace officers to help enforce these stronger measures to protect Edmontonians, and helping residents and businesses navigate these new restrictions so that we can all help do our part to curb the spread of the virus. So it is a relief to see the province take a metropolitan approach to tackling the spread of COVID-19. I have consistently stressed that we need to not just look at Edmonton, but apply a borderless regional context to all kinds of things, but especially a virus that does not care the letterhead your tax notices come from. After all, many people live in St. Albert but work in Edmonton, or live in Edmonton and have family in the county, for example. And so without a regional approach, which the province has the power to implement more readily and easily than we do on our own, Alberta just will not be able to curb the spread in our large centres. So this is good. For example, consistency on mask expectations finally across our region is clearer and easier for everyone to follow. It's also fairer to business, and it can also be more consistently and firmly enforced. So I welcome these stiffer measures, but they'll really only work if Edmontonians are behind their implementation, especially as we respect the prohibition on gatherings at home for the time being to reduce transmission. Back in the beginning of this pandemic, our sacrifices and our collective efforts made a significant difference to flatten the curve. We need to tune back into that instinct. We need to follow these rules and restrictions. It's essential. We need to do our part to avoid preventable deaths and help our healthcare system recover. All that said, enforcement remains a key element of success in our COVID-19 response, which is why I was pleased to hear that the province has heard our desire to assist and is seriously considering delegating enforcement powers for municipal peace officers to enforce these public health emergency orders. We need all hands on deck for education and for enforcement. So we'll have a further update on all of this on Friday when Council meets at our Emergency Advisory Committee meeting. It's my hope that these new public health measures announced by the province will help curb the spread of the virus, but the City of Edmonton remains vigilant and we remain agile. We will continue to monitor the situation and are prepared to act further should we see the need based on any additional data and recommendations presented to us by our city administration, as well as by the medical officers of health. And so with that, I'll pass it on to Adam to talk a little bit more specifically about how the city will assist with these new measures. Adam?
Mr. Mayor, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. As you know, the state of public health emergency was declared by the province yesterday, and that it comes with a series of mandatory health measures that will restrict the lives and lifestyles of Edmontonians for the next 3 weeks. The aggressive spread of the virus needs to be turned around immediately and drastically, or we risk seriously compromising the entire health system in our region and magnifying the pain, suffering, and tragedy experienced by individuals, families, and businesses. The province's new mandatory restrictions are broad and complex. They will require our organization to take some time to understand what they mean for the services we deliver and the impacts to residents and businesses. We're working hard to get answers to the many questions that have surfaced about recreation centers, outdoor public amenities, and enforcement, to name a few. As the Mayor said, we'll update you in the coming days as details become available. In the meantime, I'd like to speak to our initial impressions of the restrictions. The province's latest targeted restrictions send clear message to Edmontonians. Do not come in close contact with others outside your household. And for those living alone, restrict your contact to 2 other individuals. Now is not the time for social gatherings in your home or elsewhere. There will be additional monitoring of behavior with hefty penalties given to those who do not comply. And of course, the basic health measures are still required. Physical distancing, wearing a face covering in indoor public spaces, frequent hand hygiene and sanitation, and staying home if sick. These must be consistently practiced every day. As the Mayor said, we're supportive of the province's new mandatory restrictions, and we will continue our role in amplifying and echoing them. We're currently assessing how the restrictions will impact our services, as I've said, and on Friday at the Emergency Advisory Committee meeting, we'll be providing Council with an implementation update. I'd like to highlight 3 parts of the announcement that align with the ongoing city actions. As the Mayor said, enforcement. It was good to hear that the province has announced more stringent enforcement of its public health orders, and while we wait for those orders, better understanding of the details, we welcome the opportunity to support the province by hopefully adding our peace officers to enforcement processes, again, pending the approval of the province. As you know, the City of Edmonton has supported the wearing of face coverings in all enclosed publicly accessible spaces and public vehicles through the bylaw that was passed recently, or renewed recently. Council passed this bylaw because they understand that wearing a mask or a face covering supports both the safety of our community and supports our economic recovery. By making masks mandatory in all workplaces, the province is reinforcing the importance of personal accountability in slowing the spread. At the City of Edmonton, employees are strongly encouraged to work from home when the nature of their work allows it. It's a practice that minimizes social gatherings and eliminates physical distancing concerns. We invite all Edmonton businesses to seriously consider this option and commit to it for the next 3 weeks. The province's new mandatory restrictions are essential tools that will motivate Edmontonians to step up their commitment to safety. In addition, the city's face covering bylaw provides an additional layer of protection for individuals in enclosed public spaces. At this time, administration is not recommending that a state or local emergency be enacted. However, we continue to monitor the environment and are prepared to bring a recommendation forward to Council should the situation change. The next 3 weeks are a crucial test of our collective accountability. Families, businesses, and community all need to step up. The mandatory restrictions are stop signs meant to force immediate behavior change. They are tough measures to interrupt the surge in cases. If we don't stop and bend the curve, we risk the same or even stricter measures during the holiday season. We urge Edmontonians to do their part and adhere to these new rules. And with that, the Mayor and I are happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Yes, we'll open up for questions. As per usual, we'll do one question and then a follow-up, and then afterwards we'll see if anybody has any further questions after that. So we'll go first in the room, please, to Jeremy Thompson with CTV.
Sure. I think this is a question for Adam. This provincial sort of regional mask bylaw or mandate, how does that interact with the city's bylaw? What does it mean for the city's own mask bylaw?
The mask bylaw would stay in place, but at this point in time, we're actually not seeing in the provincial announcement any exemptions. So that is a difference. Also, in the announcement yesterday, there was a strong enforcement that all locations, whereas I think some latitude was sometimes made available to different businesses in terms of how you would apply, especially if there's a non-public facing component to your operation and your cohort. But so they are stricter than the current face covering bylaw that we have. We can still enforce our face covering bylaw with our peace officers, but hopefully if the province supports providing our peace officers some enforcement power, we'll be permitted to enforce further. And this is something that we'll be sharing with the Emergency Advisory Committee on Friday. I think we're at the point where enforcement needs to be firmer, and we'll be taking those steps.
So just following up, that's a bit awkward, isn't it? Right, the mask bylaw is kind of a lower governmental tool than the provincial one, but it's more strict. How do you square that?
Well, I think it actually.
It's less strict.
Yeah, I think what this does, and the mayor alluded to it, is it creates consistency within the region. It creates an easier way to enforce, and again, if we're provided those powers by the province, it does create consistency. It's difficult for one to not follow the mask bylaw now that it's a consistent application on those areas that are in an enhanced status.
Okay, thank you. Next, we'll go to the phones. We'll go to Johnny Wakefield, please, with the Edmonton Journal. Johnny?
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, absolutely. Please go ahead.
Yeah, this is a question for Adam as well. You had mentioned a couple times that there are still details related to the enforcement piece that you need to kind of work out, and a few things that you don't quite have a full understanding of yet. Besides the role that city peace officers will play in enforcing these new measures, what are some of the things that the city is still kind of not 100% clear on in terms of the enforcement front?
Specifically on the enforcement front, just confirmation that what they alluded to yesterday, that additional municipal peace officer enforcement powers would be provided. Still waiting for specifics exactly related to that. There are different levels of peace officers that we have. We have peace officers 1 and 2, and they have different levels of training, so we just need confirmation exactly what's being provided in terms of powers by the province. As the mayor said, and as we've been saying, we can help in terms of enforcement, and we absolutely want to. So we're really hopeful those provisions are provided by the province really soon.
Johnny, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I was just wondering, there also does seem to be a little bit of confusion still on the part of the public in terms of who they should be contacting, for example, if there's a large gathering that they're aware of, or some other violation of these new restrictions. Police put out a statement today saying, please do not call 911 for these sort of things. I mean, is that a concern for the city that this might tie up resources elsewhere, just the confusion around who's supposed to be doing the actual enforcing here?
Thanks for the question. That's what we would be working out with the provincial health officers and the provincial peace officers, and also EPS, to ensure that we have a seamless method to investigate certain situations. But what I would say is our folks have been out there monitoring even before these restrictions came in, and they've got a good pulse or sense on what are some areas to monitor on the basis of these new restrictions coming into place. And so I think they have a starting point, and then as those inquiries come in through the province, they are absolutely in a better position to respond, and based on their monitoring, they may be in a ready position already because they've been out there assessing some of these areas.
Thank you. Thanks. Dustin Cook with Post Media, we'll go to you next, please.
Thank you very much. My question is also for Adam. Adam, I wanted to look specifically at rec centers. With all of the new restrictions, are the city rec centers becoming too costly to operate for the limited services they're now able to provide? And is that something that the city is looking at potentially closing?
Thanks, Dustin. That is precisely what we're evaluating. We're not yet at a point to be able to determine whether we would be considering closure. Our hope is that we have that information for Friday at the Emergency Advisory Committee meeting. But as these restrictions have come into place, there is a consideration of the cost effectiveness. There is also a consideration of physical health and mental health, and if done properly, we can still offer that service. So it's a bit of a balance of the cost associated with the benefit provided by offering this services. What I will say is that not fully detailed out, but we believe that the attendance restrictions based on the new measures that are put in place are manageable on the basis of how we're currently operating our facilities, meaning based on the size of the facilities and what programs are offered. And again, some of them may have to stop or some of them will stop. We feel like we're under that capacity threshold that's been included in these provincial measures.
Dustin, do you have a follow-up?
I do, thank you. This one's probably for the mayor. Mr. Mayor, you mentioned that on Friday there could be discussion about new measures that the city will take. What specifically, what data and what analysis are you looking at in potentially advocating for those further measures? Is there something specific that will make the city do that?
Well, we've looked forward at each one of those meetings to have a representative from Alberta Health from either, well, usually from the zone level who has access to the latest epidemiology. And so we'll be eager to have an update there, though the impact of these measures coming into effect this week will take at least a week to show up in the data. So that tracking will be an ongoing effort for, I think, every Albertan at this point who's interested in this. So we'll be keeping a close eye on all of those indicators. Unfortunately, the issue is many of them are lagging indicators. So I think the other thing we'll be looking at between now and then is compliance rates, and that one of the big questions that we'll have on Friday is, has the province come through with delegated authority for our peace officers to assist with enforcement? Because if that doesn't pan out, I know this is, I gather, one of the factors in what Calgary's looking at today about looking at reinstituting their own set of orders is the ability to enforce. So again, I think that's best done at a region-wide level in Edmonton regional context. And what will work best is to have all our municipal partners from Beaumont to Fort Saskatchewan to Parkland County to Edmonton delegated the same authority to enforce consistent provincial orders. But if that's not forthcoming, then we may need to look at some steps to empower our own folks to enforce orders. But hopefully it doesn't come to that, and it sounds encouraging that the province is going to come through on that delegated authority. So that's one of the things we'll be looking at. And I just wanted to supplement something on Adam's excellent answer, and I have full confidence that the team is on top of all of these issues. Just note that I spoke to Pilar Martinez at Edmonton Public Library, and they're running at about 20% capacity right now. So they're actually able to carry on with roughly what they have been doing within these new restrictions. And I want to acknowledge that public spaces like the library and like civic recreation centers are very important places for people who have nowhere else to go, and that the loss of those facilities during the earlier stage of this pandemic was very deeply felt by patrons of those facilities who depend on them for a sense of community and support, and the staff who love to serve them, who lost that contact too. So I think we'll be able to manage those restrictions while keeping people safe and reducing opportunities even further for a contact and transmission of this virus.
Thank you. We'll go now to Vinesh Pratap with Global News. Vinesh?
Yes, just with the Mayor and then next for Adam. So Mayor, just with the enforcement, if that authority is granted, what's your advice to citizens here? So, you know, we've been in the pandemic for about 8 months. If there are these large private gatherings, do you recommend that people call 311 and, you know, call their neighbors or their family out, or, you know, what's your advice?
My understanding is that there is a public health line where concerns with non-compliance with any provincial public health order can be reported, and that resources should be dispatched through there. Again, we're happy to supplement the provincial government's enforcement of consistent rules across the region and across the province. As to how those are going to be dispatched, I think that's one of the things that's still being worked out this week that we want to be seamless and efficient with. And I don't have that number handy, but I think it's pretty well publicized on the government's website where to report concerns with violations of any of those public health orders that are in place. And I think, you know, as with all things, our first objective with enforcement is education. We always ask nicely first and sort of try to provide people information and give them context. We've been doing lots of that for a long time, particularly around the face covering bylaw. Under the province's rules, it's pretty much no mask, no service now. And anyone who hasn't got that message is going to be facing up to a $1,000 fine now under the provincial rules. So people have had plenty of time to adapt, to get supplies of face coverings for their employees and for their families, and it's time for everyone to put one on for the next, well, as long as is necessary in order to reduce transmission of this virus at this critical time.
Thanks. Vinesh, did you want to follow up? You said for Adam?
Yeah, but actually, I want to get the Mayor again. I apologize if my question didn't come through the way I anticipated it. I guess it's more, you know, the advice you have for citizens, you know, and I'm going to use this term very conversationally, but, you know, should people be essentially ratting out their neighbors or their family members if they know that there are going to be these private social gatherings when there shouldn't be? And, you know, what's your advice to citizens on how they should deal with a situation if they encounter something like that?
Well, I personally think society and community is at its strongest when we approach each other with compassion and the benefit of the doubt. And so the same way our bylaw officers would come to someone who's not complying with a rule that seems obvious to others, there may be language barriers or cultural factors or misunderstanding that is an explanation, a human explanation for why people appear to be doing the wrong thing at such a critical time. And so I would just suggest that Edmontonians are at their best when they start from that place and then enlist the right authorities to escalate it appropriately from there with compassion, but then with the appropriate urgency and the backing of the law to protect all of our safety at this critical time.
Vinesh, what we'll do is we'll go to another reporter, and then we'll come back to you here after that here. So
Thank you.
Thank you. If we could go to Myrna with CBC French, please.
Yes, thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead, please.
Great. I was just wanting to know from the Mayor, how do you feel with the junior hockey championships coming up and the cases still mounting in the current situation? Do you still feel secure and confident about hosting this?
Merci pour la question. I'm not going to try to answer it in French, though. I appreciate that question. I noted very specifically the mention in the province's comments yesterday that if the right precautions and bubble measures are put in place, that exceptions will be granted for team sports. I understand that that is specifically to allow, subject to all of the same kinds of restrictions that worked very, very well for the NHL earlier this year, for the World Juniors to continue. Obviously, the importance of maintaining the integrity of that bubble to protect athletes, coaches, trainers, family members, and also Edmontonians would be as important now as it was during the NHL bubble. So again, I would defer to the medical officers of health to sign off on those exemptions, and it's ultimately Dr. Hinshaw who has to make that decision. So provided the measures are to her satisfaction, I'm quite confident that Edmontonians have shown that we can cordon off an area and with the right testing and access control, maintain the integrity of for a sports team to stay safe, and the people who will work with them to stay safe too.
Would you like a follow-up?
No, I'm good, thanks.
Thanks. We'll go to another round of questions here, and we'll start with Vinesh, please, just because I know you have one going here.
For sure. Thank you so much. And this one's just for Adam. Adam, you alluded to it in earlier remarks, but again, 8 months, 9 months into this pandemic, when does education turn more to more strict enforcement and fines? Again, if the province does delegate that authority.
Thanks, Vinesh. I'd say we still lead with education, but I think we're there in terms of being firmer in our enforcement to ensure that the folks are getting the message that it takes everybody to bend this curve. So I applaud our staff. They've been, to the mayor's comments, very compassionate and understanding and trying to educate. But I think we're getting to a point here where we need to be firmer in our approach as it relates to enforcement. It will still absolutely come with compassion and education, but if it's blatant abuse or blatant, a group or an individual blatantly not following the health restrictions, I think we're going to be firmer in our enforcement. That will be our approach.
Vinesh, do you want to follow up on that?
No, I'm good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah, please go ahead in the room here, Jeremy.
Just a quick question for the mayor here. I'm just looking for some overall reaction to the restrictions in general. Are they enough? Are they enough? Do you like what you heard yesterday?
Well, the city had begun doing some work on our own and with our neighbors in the region and with other larger Alberta centres, with some advice from public health and infectious disease experts to look at what kinds of measures could be brought in. And I will say that the measures the province has brought in are not dissimilar from some of the measures that the city was beginning to consider, should we have to go that direction with hopefully a synchronized regional approach. Again, the province taking the lead using their much stronger tools is what we have been asking for. As to the specific measures, I don't think armchair quarterbacking the medical officer of health and cabinet is helpful right now. I'm just grateful that stronger measures are in place now after the broad and urgent call from civil society, from the healthcare system, and from mayors that the government has responded to with stronger measures.
Follow up? Okay. And I think Dustin's left on the call. Dustin, did you want another question?
I do. Thank you very much for allowing us to ask another question. And I do have a quick one, probably for Adam. Adam, are there any talks about shelter capacity? And with this spike, you mentioned, I think it was last week, that the shelters were looking at finding isolation spaces. How is that going? And is there any thought of increasing space to provide, I believe, 2 meters of space between cots instead of the 1, which is set out right now in the current measures?
Thanks, Dustin. So in terms of isolation space, that's an ongoing discussion with Alberta Health Services and the province on possible expansion for that. In terms of the shelter facilities, some are able to offer the 2 meter spacing, some are not. Obviously, the case is rising. It's a concern. So our folks are working closely with the agencies to try and do our best to provide that space. But as folks know, the numbers of homeless exceed the space that's available. So we have to find that right balance to make sure someone has a roof over their head and the appropriate support systems with the pandemic. And I just, again, want to applaud the agencies and the great folks that they have working in those facilities for the work that they're doing, which is amazing under these circumstances. So short answer is we're continuing to work with health on health services on isolation spaces and trying to be creative in being able to provide as much space within the existing shelter spaces as possible.
And do you want a quick follow-up?
No, I'm good. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you everybody for being here today, and have a good afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you so much.